Introduce you. I can't not introduce you. Our next speaker is going to be Professor Mona Haggag. She's a professor of archaeology at Alexandria University and president of the Archaeological Society of Alexandria. It gives me great pleasure to present Mona, who's a very dear and old friend. And she chairs now the Archaeological Society, which was probably one of the oldest societies, archaeological societies in this part of the world, in Alexandria. And it was created by a group of people, civil people who are interested in archaeology. So we have a tradition of interests in archaeology as far as Alexandrian culture is concerned. Please, you have the floor.
Let me first express my feeling of being privileged, of being here among you with such a group of distinguished speakers and honorable audience in a very perfectly organized conference like this one. And I want to thank each and everybody who was behind my presence here. So thank you. Actually, although in spite of the repeated number of passages which reached us from literary sources praising the beauty and magnificence of Hellenistic Alexandria and its buildings, none of those buildings remained to us. And the past 2 centuries witnessed the discovery of a huge number of architectural elements that are parts of ruinous buildings from Hellenistic times in different locations of the ancient districts of the city. In spite of the fragments that we do not know their specific provenance other than having been discovered in Alexandria, a majority of fragments were found in places that do not give any details about their context. Very few pieces are well documented in certain buildings that once had parts of their foundation reserved in situ, but again, we do not know the ground plans of these buildings, and we do not know the parts from which those fragments came. Those buildings actually, some of them or some of the areas of the finds indicate buildings of monumental nature. And some of the mouldings that remained from such buildings indicate also that they were fitted in a general large scheme of decorative architectural elements. 3 intriguing works dealt with this repertoire of architectural fragments written by Patrizio Pensabene and 2 books by Barbara Kachov about Komeldeka finds mainly, and recently, or in 2015, Sarah Mustafa has delivered her MA to the Alexandria Center for Hellenistic Studies, and she tackled the cataloging and studying of mouldings, only mouldings. This paper actually is a re-investigation of such mouldings from 2 points of view. The first is the concept of an Alexandrian contribution to Hellenistic architecture in order to respond positively or negatively to the most disputed term of Theodor Schreiber, the pan-Alexandrianism. And the second point of view is the prominent appearance of Egyptian elements in Alexandrian mouldings. Actually, the pieces, some of the pieces still maintain their stucco covering and some parts of their paintings. In addition to fragments that came from areas of civil architecture, there are some of them came from the well-known cemeteries of the city, from all cemeteries of the city. But apart from those pieces from the cemetery, the majority of the fragments express the Alexandrian daily life and public life, not death. The finds came mainly from the royal quarter of the city and from Komildika area, as our honorable colleague, Dr. Gregory Mayerik, has been speaking in this morning. They came from three areas mainly of the royal quarter. One is, one is the northernmost insula here, which is an area called Chantier Politi, and they discovered a huge building which is usually called in literature the Great Stoa of Alexandria, and another area to the south, directly to the south, which is called Chantier Fini, and it is a group of constructions which are later in date than those of the Stoa building, which is dated to the time of Ptolemy III. And the third area of the royal quarter is the repertoire of blocks which Dr. Jean-Yves Empereur spoke about this morning. They are lying underwater around the citadel of Qaid Bay, and most of them, there is actually a good report about them, but they are still not reachable to be studied. The area of Komildika past, I don't know how to bring it back, the slides, but I'll try. Box.
The box, the small box. No, the other one. The other one. The green one.
There is no green color here. Ah, the other box here. Okay, thank you. The other area is Komildika area, which is outside the periphery of the Basileon, or the royal quarter, but actually the pieces are very valuable in such a kind of study. These are the pictures of the discovery of the Great Stoa of Alexandria. It is a very huge building which has colonnades, two-storied colonnades made of marble and limestone, and they are dated by Hefner with good proofs that they are dated to Ptolemy III. They constitute Doric friezes and Ionic friezes, as you can see, but they indicate very clearly that the Alexandrian architects at that time were working according to the norms of Greek architecture, of Hellenistic, in the mainstream of Hellenistic architecture, and they did nothing over that. The Komildika area, the domicile area, which was abandoned by the end of the 2nd century, also give an idea about the canonical Doric and Ionic architecture of Alexandria, although the huge size of the blocks and the use of stucco coating caused large dimensions of architectural elements in Alexandria with simply articulated profiles. But all of these, in addition to what has been known from the tombs, the existing tombs, and the tombstones, we can form a general idea about Alexandrian particularities in Doric and Ionic orders. This Stoa building has parts which were unfinished, and we have the normal two fasciae architrave in Ionic, which was the general Hellenistic setting for Ionic architraves, and the elongated dentils with wide VI. Now, the early tombs of Alexandria, Alabaster tomb, Shagbi tomb, and Mustafa Pasha, were all mainly Doric in order. But in Mustafa Pasha, we can notice some particularities. The columns are very high and relatively the diameter is small, which resulted in wide intercolumniations. And the north and south friezes of the court, the main court of Mustafa Pasha Tomb 2, has, as you see, 3 triglyphs in each intercolumniation, while the east and west friezes have 2 triglyphs in each intercolumniation. This variation in arrangement may be used in order to give access, wide access, to the rooms behind the north and south friezes of Mustafa Pasha, the chamber tombs, the burial tombs of the tomb itself. And it is noticeable that the reconstruction by Trier University did not notice this difference in arrangement of triglyphs, and it has to be corrected. It is more proved with the huge peristyle tomb in Mustafa Pasha again, and I usually prefer to call it Rodievich Bonakaza, the 2 discoverers of the tomb, that has 2 triglyphs in each intercolumniation. The Mustafa Pasha tomb 1 also has an attic wall instead of the pediment, and this never happened in Greek architecture. This is Alexandrian. There is a kind also of illusionistic inclination in the Doric entablature of Mustafa Pasha. It is noticeable that the lower side of the architrave and the piers turn inward to give a sense of depth. This happened before the time of Mustafa Pasha in the tomb stele of Helixo from Hadra, Azbet Makhlouf, which also gives the example of the earliest coffers ceiling in Alexandria. The group of Chantier Fini give us more variations in Doric and Ionic. They give us the modillions, of which we are going to speak about, which are typical Alexandrian invention, and variations also in dentils and the spaces between them. Chantier Fini yielded also some stucco decorations, which were mainly used instead of the stone pieces in their places, and they give a lot of variation in decorative motifs and patterns, with egg and tongue, with Lisbian leaf pattern, and with the guilloche pattern, as you see. The dentils, as mentioned by Vitruvius, should have the height corresponds to the depth. The width should equal half of the height, while the distance between dentils should equal half or 2/3 of the width. Such a canonical ratio did not happen in Alexandria except in this example in Mustafa Pasha Hypogeum 3. Other dentils from Alexandria varied very much in their ratios, but the most repeated one is the elongated dentils with very wide, narrow VI between them. The most distinctive type of Alexandrian dentils is the square dentils, which have the VI corresponds to the width of the dentil itself. So the VI are exactly like the width, and the dentils are square. The examples are in Anfushi 2 and Anfushi 5, room 4. We have a lot of fragments actually with these Alexandrian square dentils from Komildika, especially with segmental pediments, which are actually Egyptianizing and with Egyptian decorations. These square dentils happened all over the Hellenistic times. We have examples from the 3rd century, from Shadbi tomb, examples from the 2nd century, from Mex. Unfortunately, this loculus slab has been destroyed directly after its uncovering decades ago. But these dentils, square dentils, Alexandrian dentils, are used in a Hellenic or Hellenistic atmosphere of decoration, the garlands and all these things. In the 1st century, the same dentils, the square dentils with the same VI, are used with an Egyptian atmosphere of decoration. Mixing Doric and Ionic was a general Hellenistic feature in architecture in all Hellenistic centers, but Alexandria added Corinthian to such a mixture. The Corinthian is mixed with the Doric here in chart B and with the Ionic in chart B, A, and B. The Corinthian is also mixed with other orders in Mustafa Pasha tomb and Gabbari tomb. But the major characteristic of Alexandrian mouldings is the modillions. Modillions are projections in the soffit of the corniche supporting and decorating it. And they are of two kinds. The first kind is rectangular modillions with a central groove, and the other type is the square hollow modillions, but we do not know which of the two types preceded the other. Modillions from Chantier Finney give us an example of alternation between the two types at the same corniches. And from the last, second, early first centuries, we have this alternation between square and rectangular modillions, the same in the first century BC to early first century AD. And we have other variations with modillions like diamonds or coffers from tombs and from also secular buildings. Variations also happened in the upper and lower mouldings, upper on top of the modillions or below the modillions. But the usual setting was the chyma recta and strip in the upper mouldings and the flat ovolo and strip in the lower mouldings. It is Judith Mackenzie who first referred in her valuable monograph about Alexandrian architecture to the origin of modillions as influenced by the roof beams of the ceilings of Egyptian tombs, giving an early example in the rock-cut tombs of Deir Rifa, dated to the 12th century, but actually I didn't visit Deir Rifa, and this is not, I cannot use it as an example, but I can use Bani Hassan, which is more famous and more frequented. They have these modillions in the ceiling beams. And there are some blocks which incorporate direct Egyptian elements from cemeteries as well as from secular buildings. We have the sphinxes from Mustafa Pasha, which are Egyptian element, of course. We have the sun disk in Shadbi and in Gabbari, which are also, which is Egyptian, directly Egyptian. But we have these pieces which are really interesting because they are blocks with the decoration of Hather's capital. The two types of Hather capitals, the sistrum type, Naiskos, alternated with the type of an entrance with cobra crowned with a solar disk and stylized palmettes in the third one. We have three cobras in place of the triglyphs in Hippogeium II Gabbari Tir's tomb. The cavetto corniche is also Egyptian in origin, and we have this piece from the second half of the 2nd century. It happens usually with arched corniche, and it never occurred in Greek rectangular, triangular pediments. This, it seems that segmental pediments, which have their origin in Egypt, incorporating friezes and corniches molded in the Alexandrian style, were the nucleus for the Alexandrian architects to produce more various and unprecedented forms for their external and internal facades. Those new forms are looked at by modern scholars as Baroque architecture. We have examples of curved pediment and entablatures attested in fragments, and we have this very interesting example of a concave entablature. You notice the curve here. So this is one of the two projecting parts of a concave entablature, a facade of a niche or something like that. Broken entablature with broken pediment was inspired from the broken lintel in Egyptian temple entrances, of which the earliest example we know is the entrance of the great temple of Aten at Amarna. Egyptian-style Ptolemaic temples in Upper Egypt used broken lintel, but a lamp from the 2nd century BC from Alexandria or environs depicts a temple of Aphrodite. And Aphrodite has an Egyptianizing temple with broken pediment, with Hather's head instead of the capitals, with the sun disk, and with the frieze of the Uraeus. Broken pediments are occurred actually in many other places like the Chantier Fini and Qom el-Dikka area. Gabbari area has, when the modillions or the dentils are oblique and trapezoidal in shape, that means that the pediment was curved in a way or another. Actually, there are many details of comparing the fragments with the tombs and the tomb stele. But in order to save time, the comparison proves the following conclusion. During the early decades of the foundation of the city, Greek architects were commissioned by the kings to construct the required edifices of the new city of Alexandria. The material available in hand, which is the fragments, the repertoire of fragments, they are hundreds, prove that those architects have worked according to the norms of classical canons to produce buildings in the mainstream of Hellenistic architecture. The 3rd century Alexandrian architecture, both